Hi, and welcome to Starry Woods AstroCast, a podcast all about studying and learning astrology, relating with cycles and the stars in a deeper, more enchanted way, and fun astrological ideas and techniques. I'm the host, Tony of the Woods, and this is our first episode. Recording began at 7:37 p.m. in Terre Haute, Indiana. I'm kicking off the entire podcast with the first in a series, chats with fellow students of astrology and astrologers about their learning journey. I'm excited to welcome Rob, my friend and fellow student astrologer, onto the show. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Tony. Thanks for having me here. It's good to be here.
Oh, yeah, thanks for coming on. I just wanted to get into a little bit of a conversation about your journey in learning astrology, learning techniques, tips and tricks you might have for anyone listening who's just at various stages in their learning journey. Why don't we just jump right in? Could you tell everyone a bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm relatively new to learning astrology in my life. I'm in my first house year. And so um, I've had a lot of life experience before falling into the rabbit hole of astrology. And so I would say the the date that I really began on my journey would have been December 21st, 2020, when there was a conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn, which happens, I guess, about every 20 years or so. It
Yeah,
was in Aquarius. Um, at the time, I didn't really realize or understand what that meant. But so I had been given a gift of a tarot deck, and it was the Pixie Smith deck, the most well-known tarot deck. And I wanted to understand what the cards meant. And I read a lot of I found a few tarot books that gave meanings behind the cards. And eventually I came upon Aleister Crowley's Thoth deck, which is very astrological focused. And so each card in that major arcana is given an astrological correspondence of like a sign or a planet, and also elements. Then the minor arcana are given um, decans, which so when the zodiac is divided into 36 equal divisions, like three for each of the 12 signs. And that's what when I was like, there's something to astrology that astrology has been around a lot longer than tarot cards. Like,
for sure. Yeah, actually, I can. Anyone would like to see, I can just pull out. I have the Thoth deck handy, so I can show people what you're talking about here. So for example, not exactly the most, well, it's a pretty card. So there's the Tower card. You can see at the bottom there, it shows an astrological symbol, and I believe it should say Mars.
little Mars glyph.
Yep. And so the Tower card, like you were saying, is associated with Mars. Um, and I'm just noticing it's subtle in the Thoth deck with the minor arcana. So like, I keep picking up these like problematic cards. Let me pick out a nice looking one. Maybe there's the Two of Wands, called Dominion. I could probably do this in a better way. Hopefully, it's not
Yes.
reversed.
The way that they are divided, so the cardinal sign is the 2, 3, 4 cards.
Yeah.
So the Two of Wands would be the first decan of Aries, third the second, fourth the third, and then of the fixed fire Leo, that would be the first decan would be 5, then 6 and 7, and then the third, the mutable sign of Sagittarius would be 8, 9, and 10 of the cards. And then E- the Chaldean or Egyptian decans, um, there's like a Decan rulership, and that planet is associated with, or that card is associated with that planet in um, that decan of that, or that 10 degrees of that sign. And so that's, for me with tarot, the minor arcana is one of the more difficult. Um, difficult to. I find the major arcana is easier to interpret than the minor arcana. Um, but then the Pamela Coleman Smith Pixie drawings have become iconic, and so trying to sort of like find a link between that decan and then with the Pixies illustration, and try and see how they connect. Like the two of swords is like a very iconic card. The two and the three with the three swords in the heart. The two is like the a blindfolded woman holding two swords, and so and then that's the first decan of Libra, um, which is like the symbol of the scales. So it's kind of like there's connection between the imagery. Like I don't know how much Pamela Coleman Smith knew about the Deccan rulerships when she was drawing them, but I've heard that she kind of almost like intuitively channeled the drawings in a sense.
Yeah, it sounds. I've heard similar things, and then also she just had a very strong connection and a lot of knowledge herself, and it's great that she's kind of coming back into more respect for the contribution that she did. It's her deck essentially, with some help by A.E. Waite versus the other way around is kind of how I would see it. But yeah, I can add some like links or images of some of those cards. It's a little better than trying to hold them in front of the camera. Um, but what I was trying to show is that at least in the Thoth deck, he kind of embedded the little astrological symbols within the decanic minors if you know to look for them. So the Mars symbol, in the case of the Two of Wands, being the ruler of the first decan of Aries, and then at the bottom there's an Aries symbol that you can see, but kind of showing that connection. At first, that kind of confused me with thinking of like Mars in Aries, like a planetary placement, but that's not what it means. It means it's the first decan of Aries, which, according to one system of rulership, is ruled by Mars. But once I got that straight, it's kind of opening up tarot and astrology for me as I look into the decans a bit more. I'm still early in my study of the decans, but yeah, it's definitely, I can see how that could end up sparking an interest in astrology, kind of seeing how rich it is that it's being embedded into these cards. Yeah. So you got in via tarot, it sounds like, and then the astrology bug bit around that time.
Yeah. Um, so while I was trying to learn how to do tarot, I was like studying, like trying to study some magic. So the first thing I came across was a book called Modern Magic by Donald Michael Craig. I think some guy who was like really big in the occult community. And so I was like reading this book, and it was like you got to do the lesser banishing ritual of the Pentagon. And so I was like, okay, I'll give this a shot. And there was a big focus on um, angels named who have the same, like there's angels from Abrahamic religions, I think is the way to put it. They're angels found in like Christianity and Judaism and maybe Islam. I don't know much about the angels of Islam, but I never really was raised like in a Christian household, so I didn't really have too much connection to the Christian imagery. And but so I was like I was like, I'm gonna do some research about the lesser banishing ritual of the Pentagon. And so I just went into Google and I typed, did they ever do the lesser banishing ritual of the Pentagon in Harry Potter? So I Googled that. And like one of the first like results was a Reddit post in a subreddit called Quaria. And I was like, what's that? So I like click on it, and it's like this magic system that's been developed. It's like a modern magic system by developed by a woman named Josephine McCarthy. It's completely free. All of her books are like posted online. So I was like, oh, you know what? This seems neat. This seems like right down my alley. Like I heard it described as like an open source magic system, and I was like super into open source stuff. And so I started looking into it, and in the first, it's like separated into like modules, and the first module is a bunch of chapters, and one of the chapters is astrology, and so that's kind of, it all kind of links together for me, like the tarot, the astrology, and the magic. And in that first module, they describe a way like to look at astrology and how you can fit it into the system. And it's like a map of your fate, and sort of like revealed to me that the concept of magic and fate are completely intertwined, you know, because like magic is like um, implying that an individual has the agency to manipulate reality, I guess. Or, and then I think Crowley has like a definition where it's like something about your will, um, but essentially like changing reality because you will it to.
Yeah, I actually like John Michael Greer's version of Dion Fortune's version of that quote, which goes something like, magic is the art and science of causing change in consciousness in accordance with will, which is a nice sort of backdoor in for people who have like a more materialist paradigm, because it's like, oh yeah, you're just changing your consciousness, but the definition itself doesn't say changing your own consciousness. It's just consciousness in general, which essentially underlies everything. I mean, according to some like metaphysical understandings,
Yeah,
but yeah, the idea is changing the universe in accordance with one's will. So yeah, I thought that's a fun summarization, at least. How do you like that?
I love it. And it's funny that you mentioned consciousness because that was kind of what drove me to look for magic, because I would have been atheistic for quite a while. Um, and I started meditating, and I was studying these like books of how to do Buddhist meditation, but like I think it's Vipassana meditation, not vegetation, but meditation. And it, like directed at Westerners, and sort of like taking out the spiritual aspect of it and just making these manuals of like, this is how you meditate to be more productive or something like that, right? So like I think one of them I was reading was The Mind Illuminated, and I thought it was a really cool manual based on different Buddhist texts. But you know, of course, the guy who wrote it turned out to be sort of like someone who had a lot of issues with like, you know, like it's funny because you can never like put someone on a pedestal because like they're just human. But this guy turned out, like, despite being this like great meditation teacher, like he had some serious marital issues. Um, but that's besides the point. Basically, what like I started meditating, and I was like, consciousness is a huge part of that, because you kind of like you you realize that like, wow, there's like this like background consciousness going on. So I started like looking up consciousness theories of like scientific consciousness theories, and there's like one of the most popular theories is this theory called the hard problem of consciousness. It's like a guy named David Chalmers, I believe, who studies consciousness and sort of argues, or at least takes the perspective that of panpsychism. I think, I don't want to like misrepresent his views, but panpsychism was mentioned, and that's basically very rudimentary understanding of it that I have, is that there's a consciousness that pervades everything, and um, our our perception that we have this individual consciousness is actually um, not really provable using the type of logic and or whatever that this philosopher uses. So it's funny because yeah, like you say, it's manipulating consciousness, and it's like yeah, we even the forefront scientists and philosophers of who are studying consciousness are like, you know what, consciousness is actually like bigger than our individual experience. And so yeah. So I guess I'm rambling on a lot about that one quote, but I love it. I think it's cool. But I think the thing about magic and astrology is that like they kind of have this tenuous relationship because in astrology sort of implies that everything is predetermined, and magic implies that we have the agency to change the outcome. Um, so it's pretty neat. There's some tension there, and I like it. Well, I mean, I don't know if I say I like it, but I think it's it's like the where I focus when I'm trying to do my studies. Like also, astrology is like this reference point that we all share. We all look up to the sky. We all see the planets in the exact same spot. You know, some of us um, like cut it up differently. You know, like into different zodiacs, tropical zodiac, sidereal zodiac, and then there's different house systems. But when you take out the zodiac and the house systems, it's just the planets, and they're in the same spot of the sky for you and me. You think they're in the first house, and they're in the Leo, and then I see it, and I see them in a different zodiac and house, but it's still the exact same planet in the exact same spot. And so it's like it's something that we all share, and it's it's interesting because it does. Even like astrophysicists believe in determinism. They're like based on the Big Bang, they're like, yeah, everything's like Einstein, I'm pretty sure, was a determinist because he believed in this cube reality where like all time and space is like a cube.
Okay. Yeah, like a block universe sort
That's
of
it. Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
where
That's what I'm talking
everything.
about.
Yeah,
Block universe.
yeah. Which I've looked into. It's both interesting and unsettling at the same time. uh, and yeah, I mean we're going right to it. The fate, free will, nature of reality. I love it. Might as well go on this tangent a little bit more, although I'm sure we could talk for a long time. I did want to kind of go back a little bit to where you're kind of talking of the determinism versus the um, sort of changeability implied when using like looking into magic or even just any sort of astrological remediation or adjusting one's actions or thoughts based on astrological interpretation. Um, it's a really fertile sort of edge area, kind of like in ecology where you have an edge ecosystem where it's not like total forest or like total like prairie, but it's kind of on the edge of both, and that's where you see a lot more variety and like interesting things going on, or even a different metaphor of like the twilight, um, of like between night and between day. Um, there's a lot more possibility. It seems like it's where the nuance comes out. And I think astrology, uh, and in connection to magic, it's sort of on that edge always, where uh, people looking into or studying astrology have to see how they feel about that of complete determinism versus complete freedom. And uh, at least for me, I'm falling kind of both and and also in the middle,
Yeah,
because I kind of see the patterns or archetypes sort of laid out, barring some sort of solar system incident, which would redo some sort of cycle. However, it's pretty fairly predetermined where the planets are going to be at any one time from the point of view of being on Earth, which is, like you said, the sort of the phenomenological, uh, observable version of astrology, at least for the layperson who's not an astronomer. And so there is that, but there is also the level of, maybe it's because our astrology is not as developed as it could be, or maybe it's just because like Richard Tarnas says that astrology is archetypally predictive, but not concretely predictive, meaning if there's a transit of Venus to Neptune in a certain sign, it can mean any like number of things. However, I mean, I mentioned Neptune, but when looking into more and more traditional astrology, it does seem to start drilling down more and more specifically than modern astrology, on the other hand, or what we used to call modern astrology, which is a lot more open. It does seem to be, as astrology is developed and recovering ancient techniques, prediction can get a lot more specific, to where I hear about people going into like crises when like looking into zodiacal releasing in particular, of how like specific it can be about different forecasts. Haven't gone deep into it myself, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting question. I personally feel comfortable sidestepping it emotionally, at least, and just sort of interestedly thinking about it every once in a while. But uh, I also found that when starting to consult with people, having a few lines about what I believe, uh, in the hopes that that could help alleviate anyone's fear of determinism, uh, or um, anything like that. So that's how I'm approaching it right now. So it's interesting that you're bringing that up. But yeah, for sure, it's a very philosophically and practically interesting side of being involved in astrology. But yeah.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, I went there pretty quickly. I mean, like you said, well, we're diving right into the deep end. But like what you were saying about how the those areas where there's two different sort of biomes meeting, and it's what I've heard of these areas referred to as liminal, and have like a liminality to them, and it made me think of this. I used to live in this place that had like a picture on the wall of the ocean and the sky, and it said, "There's magic in the distance where the ocean meets the sky," and it always stuck with me. Just reminded me of what you were saying there.
Yeah, and there's a lot there that we could look at, but maybe that's better for a future discussion, just because how intense that can get. But I guess to maybe like redirect a little bit, getting back to the learning. So uh, you're kind of exploring tarot, and then you started Josephine McCarthy's course, or we're looking into that with the, I think the Quoria course. Yeah, um, which looks great, by the way. I haven't uh, explored it myself, but it does seem like a solid study, and I really like listening to Josephine in like podcast interviews. She has a very kind of grounded personality and very practical, even as she talks about imaginal uh, journeying and ritual and meditation. It's all very um, rooted in what works in her experience. So uh,
Yeah,
definitely should include a link to that for people who are interested, especially because it's free and open source, which is great.
yeah.
So where did you go from there? So there's an astrology kind of module within the course, and I'm assuming that sparked your own like
Yeah.
interest to go further.
Yeah, I was like, I want to understand this. I want to know what's going on here. One of the recommended books was Planets in Transit by Rob Hand. And so it's a pretty cool book. And but I think it could be described as cookie cutter, which is kind of like a term used in the astrological community about books that just kind of provide you with a delineation, which is the description of uh, planets in a house or planets communicating with each other or whatever.
Oh yeah,
Um,
cookbook. Yep.
it could, yeah. So, and I was like, this is cool. And I was like, I could write horoscopes like this. And I always, ever since I was younger, like I was always like aware of horoscopes and like reading for my sun sign, which is Cancer, and just being like, okay, I guess I'm like a crybaby crab or something. Like, and just, but I was interested in it. And like when I was like, I'm sure you probably, I don't know if you remember this, but like or this was like, because where you're in America, I'm in Canada, but like when I was younger, maybe under 10, so maybe like 30 to 25 years ago, um, if you went to a grocery store and or like a pharmacy or something, when you went up to the till, there'd be like a little box of these rolled up papers, and there'd be one for each zodiac sign,
Oh,
and
cool.
it'd be like $2, and you buy it, and you'd unroll it like a scroll, and it would just be like a horoscope based on your sun sign. And so I was always sort of aware of sun signs, but um, I was very skeptical of them because I was like, you can't you can't define me because of the month I was born. And yeah, so when I started looking into astrology, and I was like, okay, well, there's all these other planets, not just the sun. You got a moon sign, you got Mercury sign, Venus sign, and then modern astrology, you've got your Jupiter, Saturn, and modern you've got Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, and um, then then I was like, houses. What the heck is a house? So that's when I kind of realized, like, oh, like if you want to write in a horoscope, you've got to write it from your first house sign, which is your rising sign. And and for me, that was a big like kaboom, mind blown paradigm shift. Like it that was when I was like, whoa, okay, astrology isn't just your sun sign. And like, yeah, sure, like I've got to the place now where I accept that sun sign delineations like pop astrology works because I can see like a fractal nature to it all, and so like I can see why it would work, but it's definitely general. Like when you group like all the people born within a 30-day period and you try and describe them all, it's very general. But then when you look at your rising sign, which is based on the moment you're born, like where the horizon is, and it's like, okay, yeah, this is a lot more personal now. And then and that's where the houses come in. And that was my biggest first hurdle in my, like, well, it wasn't hurdle, it was like there's houses, I have to understand what these houses are. um I wanted, because I, I could read Rob Hand's Planets and Transits book, and I could come up with something for like the planets going through my house, but I wanted to like understand a deeper, I wanted to know why he came up with those. I wanted to know where he was coming up, because I trusted that he didn't just make it up. Like I knew there was some system behind it, and so I was sort of like driven to learn what that system was. I had to figure out how to build those delineations up from the basic foundational principles, and houses are a big part of that. And well, in terms of like a horoscope, like I came to learn that horoscope is actually means your first house. It means hour marker. And all horoscopes, I mean, the word means something different now. Like originally it meant your first house, and I guess now because of the way language changes over time, and because of the influence of certain astrologers in modern times, like horoscope now means a sun sign. But I was like, okay, well, I don't want to go, I don't want to think about that anymore. I was like, I want to do it the old-fashioned way. And so I think that's when I found astrology podcasts, Chris Brennan's astrology podcast.
Okay, cool. So basically, you'd been introduced to astrology as something uh, useful as like a cycle tracking model as part of like your esoteric or magical studies. Um, then, as delving into it, you found that there's a lot more to it than you initially realized. However, the foundations weren't super obvious based on the materials you had access to at that point. Uh, and then so now you're ending up at the astrology podcast. So keep going.
Yeah, the astrology podcast was the big like, oh my, oh my God. Like, because I also like I was really like I hate the word skeptical. I also don't like the word hate, but um I was still like I don't think I can believe this. How can this make any sense? Like I've put a lot of work into like getting through that. And like I'm like on the other side now. But it was actually Chris Brennan posted the astrology podcast was a video of a presentation by a guy named Alan White, and he's like this old guy, and he's like pretty frail, and he's close to passing away at the time of this presentation. But Chris sort of talks about how this was like he gave the similar presentation to Chris and his fellow students at Kepler University, and it was like sort of like they all got the bug for traditional astrology. And then when I saw that, I was like, this is it. This is it. I got to figure out what this is all about. Like this is what I'm looking for. The stuff that Alan Leo was talking about in that, Alan White was talking about in that presentation. And he's passed away since then, from what I've heard, but his legacy will live on. And I've noticed that Demetra George dedicates the ancient astrology books to Alan White, or mentions how important his influence was at some point in one of those books. So yeah, it was that I was listening to. Then I started listening to the weekly podcast with Chris, and Austin usually at the time was like one of his main guests, and it was like then I discovered his episode of like the books. Well, I came upon his episode about the most recommended books for astrologers, and so I got them all. I got so You Were Born for This by Chani Nicholas. So I got that one first, and I got that Carol Taylor Astrology Using the Wisdom of the Stars in Your Everyday Life, which has a modern perspective, whereas Chani Nicholas is kind of like looks at your sun, moon, and rising, and you can pick out your own planets, your own sun, moon, and rising from the Chani Nicholas book. And then there was the Heavenly Spheres by Elena Alivar and Louis Ribeiro. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. So I got that one, and then the book that goes with it, Traditional Workbook or Traditional Astrology Workbook. And there was also Richard Tarnas, Cosmos and Psyche, which at the time was just being released as a documentary series. So I read the first couple of chapters and then was like, you know what, I'll watch the documentary, which didn't really do it for me. And then also Chris Brennan's book, Hellenistic Astrology. And then at the time, it was just volume 1 of Demetra George's Ancient Astrology. Or it was also recommended to get Demetra George Astrology. I think you've spoken about the book before.
Yeah, Astrology and the Authentic Self. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started reading all those, and I guess that's where I'm at now.
Cool. Yeah, I really liked how the Alan White video spurred you on to learn traditional astrology, similar to how he spurred on Chris Brennan and the Kepler students and Demetra George into getting into traditional astrology. So his legacy is still changing people's hearts and minds today, which I'm sure he would like. So that's great.
He just had such a good attitude. Like, he was wearing the military outfit, so he's like showing off his sort of like credentials, like I'm a serious guy. And he would like joke about like Fluffy the dog's horoscope, and I was like, yeah, that's silly. I understand. Like, he just really spoke to me. And yeah, I think seeing the Hellenistic astrological system laid out like that, it really appealed to me. And I've been sort of pursuing my understanding of it since then, like just trying to like, there's just so much. And then like reading it on Heavenly Spheres, they emphasize the primary qualities of the elements than the planets' primary qualities based on their the geocentric model where the Earth is at the center, and then there's these spheres, concentric spheres that grow outwards from Mercury to the moon, Moon to Mercury to Venus, and then based on the like the sun, the moon, or luminaries. So based on the planet's distance from the luminaries, that's where they get their quality from. And then you find out so for example, Saturn is cold and dry, which is similar to Earth, which is cold and dry. And so cold and dryness um, isn't the most fertile environment for life. So Saturn needs to be moderated with a hotter and wetter um, qualities, which can come through interactions with the moon, I guess, or with in other uh, or well in signs.
Right,
And
right.
so that was like where I first was like getting really into those foundational principles of the primary characteristics of the elements and how they manifest in planets and the signs. But then I started reading the Demetri George ancient astrology books, and there's not as much reference to those primary qualities, but it's such a rich system. And I guess I'm just at a point now where I'm trying to integrate all that I've learned and just be okay with the fact that there's a lot of people out there who don't care about any of that and they're just making it up. And I was getting angry at first when I was like seeing these people. I was like, that's not right. And it was just I just had to just accept it and just be like, you know what? Like in astrology, there's a lot of people who don't give a crap about the foundations or the principles. And I can't let that bother me at all, or else I'm just going to be upset and I'm going to be sad all the time.
Yeah, that's a good side note. I would expand on just uh, like being new to astrology and seeing like takes that don't make sense, or um, arguments like the perennial house system debate, just kind of bring up confusion and uh, like wondering how everything can fit together. And I think like the journey you described is a good example of kind of like picking out the voices, like the astrologers and teachers, even if you're not like taking a course or anything, but like through the astrology podcast, like seeing like Chris's skill and the skill of the astrologers he brings on, taking the recommendations he's making and focusing on those as your core like texts of study, and using that as the foundation of like approaching astrology information from other books and sources, not to be like cloistered inside one tradition, but knowing your how you would like to approach it, and then adding on from outside that as you see fit. Uh, I think that's a good way of not getting overly confused or discouraged by the online astrology realm. That's kind of how I came into it. Um, but and just to circle back a little bit on the primary qualities of the elements, I too found a lot of um, I found that made a lot of sense, to like break astrology down into its sort of fundamental subatomic particles, if you will, and then kind of building up from that base rather than learning, um, like a lot of people had to do, like modern astrology, and then kind of going back and realizing what certain things meant and adjusting. Um, it just feels much more systematic and structured in a way that made me a lot more confident of knowing like hot, cold, wet, and dry, and how those form the elements, and then how the elements form all of like manifested existence underneath the moon. I mean, it's a kind of a mental structure. We don't even have to think of it as like a literal, true uh, thing. Like we know that the sun is at the center of the solar system. However, it's also true that from our vantage point, the sun moves across the sky through the signs, and um, that's where we're at. We're embodied here and have our kind of phenomenological perspective, and that's what like the traditional astrological systems based in, and that has never gone away. It's still how we experience things without a telescope, at least. So yeah, basically I agree with that, kind of going down to basics, and kind of building up the skeleton of the system of astrology, and then fleshing it out and making it more coherent and making it a part of ourselves through studying and practicing and contemplating. But yeah.
Yeah, I think you make a really good like point when you talk about part of ourselves, because when it all comes down to it, like, I mean, we can use astrology to predict so many things. You know, on a mundane level, you can look at how it affects our societies and stuff on a bigger level. But what really matters to us individually is our own charts. And so learning about my chart has been really, really comforting, I guess, for me, because it's just like I just it's like this is mine, this is my chart, and this is who I am. And like, so for me, you've seen my chart. I have like some pretty difficult placements. All of my planets are in retrograde, like except for Venus. Venus is getting a square from Saturn in the sixth house in Virgo. So the moon is conjunct South Node and via combusta and some other defective ways too. And it's like I have had a pretty difficult life. Like, I mean, I've put myself through some. I'm pretty open about that. I've been like addicted to alcohol use disorder. I spent a lot of my life drunk, and I'm not anymore. And like that's like pretty like my chart shows that. And like it's interesting too. Like you brought up the fact that my planets are. If you look at the progression of the planets, the progressed planets, they're no longer in retrograde. And I'm in a place in my life where I'm doing so much better than I was. And it's just so neat to think about it like that. Like, you know, like yeah, the chart was difficult and I went through some difficulties, but the planets have progressed. They're now no longer in retrograde in the progressed chart, and I'm in a better place in my life. And it's just like it's and then yeah, so it's like my personal experience in the chart informs sort of like or like gives me a glimpse into the whole fate that I'm playing out. And like I think yeah, like that's and then if when as a consultant, it seems like your goal would be to help someone come to that understanding of their own chart. It's not about it's really yeah, it's about their chart and helping them see themselves in the chart in a sense, I guess. So like because our charts are so individually unique to ourselves, which is I think is such a great argument against that astrology just generalizes people based on their sign. Well, it's like, yeah, if you don't know what astrology is, and you think everyone's sun sign is the whole thing, but it's like when you look at someone's birth chart, it's so unique. And like we are kind of all unique in our own way. And it just to me it was just like I like it. And like it's in one way, you know, you can look at it from like a psychological viewpoint where that's the planets represent parts of your psyche, but then also like I'm way out there now. Like I'm all about like spirits and magic and celestial powers. And but like I can see like I think Richard Tarnas mentions it in the Cosmos and Psyche book. Like in our framework, in our model of how we're expected to view the universe, there's no room for spirit anymore. There's no room for any of that kind of stuff. So Psyche has become that. Like Psyche is our replacement in a sense or something. So like it makes sense. Like it just I feel like I was thinking about that. I was like I feel like when we hit the enlightenment and we were like let's get rid of when I say we, I mean like Western
Right.
civilization. Um, we were like, okay, we discovered the scientific method or whatever, so let's just literally throw the baby out with the bathwater. Everything we thought before is garbage, and we live in a heliocentric universe, and there's no God, and, there's some sort of emergency happening behind me.
Uh-oh.
No, it was driving by. But yeah, like so, I think we threw the baby out with the bathwater, and I definitely tried to live my life without believing in God, but I got drunk every night, and it was like there's this the reason I bring this up is because I was trying to get to Carl Jung. Carl Jung has this correspondence with the founder of AA where they're talking about alcohol and about how like this the Latin name for alcohol is spiritus, and it's go look it up. Just look up Carl Jung alcohol quote. But Carl Jung took that perspective of like, okay, maybe there's something more to the psyche. Maybe there's like this collective consciousness, and maybe there's these archetypes, and then that kind of like gave us a gateway to astrology, to view astrology in our modern framework without having to be like, yeah, there's gods in the sky and they're deciding our fate. And I can't remember where I was going with that, but
There's a lot of interesting points there of like Cosmos and Psyche, the book, and how yeah, the psyche is replacement. I kind of see it as like a doorstop or a foot in the door of like, we can call it psyche right now, but really it's everything uh, is kind of correlated and connected and archetypal and mythical and enchanted. But psyche was the place where all of that was kind of maybe stored so it can survive uh, and be passed on today and into the future to where we can re-engage and expand on that in like a less materialist way maybe and at the same time I've also kind of thought of like astrology and the physicality of it, like the movements of the stars through, or movements of the planet, sorry, um, through the ecliptic, as a like a physical manifested like reminder and connection to spirit that will always be there. So it's like never can the world truly become materialistic. Like there will always be those signs, and like I would say the signs are everywhere in nature. Nature being just all of existence, and how I'm using that word. But the sky, and the night sky in particular, is a very like tangible thing to where if you just spend enough time, you could reinvent astrology. It will be different, of course, if you reinvent it, but not so much. I think once you start really digging into like Mesopotamian uh, astrology and star lore, uh, and then Mesoamerican and Chinese, and then yeah, Hellenistic astrology, as we're kind of continuing to grow that tradition specifically today. There's always like a phenomenological connection that seems to always correlate with certain events, and kind of like how Venus and Jupiter are brighter and look more beautiful and are the benefics, and Mars and Saturn are dingy and red or brownish colored, and those are the malefics, and they move slower. Uh, and like just how like the morning stars and evening stars work out, and like how when Venus is I believe when she's a morning star, she's going to have more of a warlike attitude. Um, uh, and then that kind of starts to show that something like the more warlike interpretations of Venus in some other cultures. So yeah, it's just like it's always there to be tapped into and expanded on, even in like the most horrifying materialist times. So that's kind of something that I got out of my partial read of Cosmos and Psyche so far. It's a pretty long read, but about halfway through so far. Um, but yeah, it's and it's so both psyche as an like an entry point into the more uh, I guess animist or uh, magical look at the world, and then at the same time, like the movements of the stars. Um, yeah, that's something that always kind of gets to me a little bit in a good way.
Yeah. And then when you think about the days of the week being associated with planets and how far back that goes, and then planetary hours, I guess I think came before days of the week. But like,
Yeah, I don't know what started first, but they're definitely like the planetary days are derived from the sequence of hours. So uh,
yeah, it's a cycle that's been repeating for thousands of years that we've been monitoring it, and it's like we can extrapolate backwards too from before it was discovered, which we do with our modern planets. Now that we've discovered these outer trans-Saturnian planets, we look back at where they were before they were discovered, and how they like this kind of stuff that was happening then. It's it's pretty neat that we've got it. All comes back to these archetypes and these 7 traditional planets, um, and their cycles, and it's all about, I guess, yeah, it's all about cycles, which is, it's funny how like there's like this like hippies and stuff like, oh, everything's a vibration, man. But it's like everything is a vibration. Physics has proven it, and it's what planets are doing. Like they're oscillating in their cycles. Everything is a vibration, and that's pretty neat. um
absolutely. Yeah, so I guess to kind of get back to the specifics of like your learning. So, um, what does that look like for you now? You're saying like you got your stack of texts to study. What is your kind of study uh, process? Your learning. What does that look like? How do you go about that? And then also, if you want to share any like chart, like of your own chart placements, that you think are relevant to like your approach to learning, absolutely share those too.
cool. I started out trying to like write a little blurb about each planet, each sign, each house, what each type of aspect means, to try and like drill it into my brain. Um, and but what I've found as I go along is that the more I try and force myself to learn astrology, the more I kind of like am going in the wrong direction, and it kind of just reveals itself to me in its own way as through charts that I read. You know, so like reading charts, I think is the key to understanding all of the different pieces, because like all the different pieces don't really matter until they're in a chart, and in that point, that's where you get to see how those little pieces, they all work together in someone's actual life, or in a mundane event. And so that's kind of what I've been focusing on. After I kept trying to like write down all of the meanings of all the different parts. It wasn't getting me anywhere, and then I just realized I just have to read charts and become aware of the planets at the moment. Try and make sure that I'm always aware where each of the planets is, in the sky, like in the tropical zodiac, and and then where the moon is and how the moon's aspecting those planets, because the moon is the final, as the energies of the planets come down to Earth, the moon's the final gateway, I guess, before our sublunar realm, where the elements are affected, or either affected, or the sign of how they'll be reacting. So that's what I'm trying to do. And I tried to write a newsletter about that, about the moon's movement, but I had to stop. It was getting tedious for me. I didn't quite enjoy it anymore, and I think I was missing the point. So I'm really trying to every day look at the planets, how they're playing themselves out in the houses in my chart, and in other people. So I've reached out to the Astro Twitter community that where I found that you and where there's lots of people, and I've just been like, who wants to people with well, and I've been focusing on difficult charts because I do have a difficult chart. Um, and then what does that even mean to have a difficult chart? Like, how does that how do the how does that mean originally? And then with taking into account progressions, taking into account transits, like is difficulty is it a bad thing? So just trying to that's where I'm at in my studies. I'm just trying to read a lot of charts, and I know that you have your article where you mentioned you're going to read 200 charts, but I think
Yeah,
it's the best advice for someone learning. At least for me, I mean, it's the only way to really make sense of it all.
cool. So I guess to be a bit more granular, like uh, do you have like a quota, or is it more of whenever you like feel like, well, I would like to do some astrology, you pick out some charts to look at? Like how does that work for you?
Yeah, I like to study the charts of like musicians that I like. I'm really fascinated with the so-called 27 Club. Um, just trying to look at them, and then like any musician, I like to focus on people who have already died because then you've already got their full life and you can look at it. I try not to look at too many people who are living, but I want to get into that someday. Like looking at celebrities who I'm interested in who are alive. Um, yeah, so day to day, I'm really just trying to finish Dementia George's second book. Um, and then I kind of want to go back and read Heavenly Spheres again. And then I want to do Dorotheus. I have a copy of Ben Dyke's Dorotheus of Sidion, and I really want to get into that book because it's like one of the oldest books, and he talks about triplicity. So I want to start looking at triplicity, and because it seems really important to me. I don't know why. It's just um, but yeah, like I'm not the most organized person. Like I have a Venus in Virgo, um, so that's my Virgo placement when we're thinking about organization. And I have my Lord of my Ascendant Mars in Capricorn, so it's like the Lord of my Ascendant is exalted, and so those Earth signs are pretty powered, like pretty activated in my chart. But I have difficulty staying organized in how I'm approaching my studies of astrology. Like it really does come down to like the transit of the day. Like we're talking right around a time when the sun um, conjoins Saturn in Aquarius, and so it's like, wow, like I really want to learn about Saturn right now. I really want to learn about Aquarius right now and conjunctions and the sun's synodic cycle with planets. And so yeah, like the transits of the day really inform what I want to learn.
That seems like there is an organization to it. I don't think it always needs to look like a college syllabus necessarily. uh, and I like you bring up the transits because it does provide like a natural kind of framework for, yeah, these transits are happening at this time, and yeah, might as well review or learn about the planets involved and the exact aspects and the planetary combinations and like concepts of like Kazemi or combustion or other like solar uh, conditions. So yeah, that seems like a solid organizing uh, thing that's sort of happening on its own within your studies. So I think that's something that uh, anyone could try, is just like notice the big transits that are happening currently and delving into everything associated with that. And and then hope, like, even looking forward to upcoming transits, and then that can evolve into your own sort of self forecasting as well. That's kind of what I'm thinking of doing as well. So yeah, that's interesting way of approaching it.
Yeah, I feel like part of me is like, you'll never understand astrology until you've experienced every transit. And like, I've experienced quite a few transits in my day without even realizing it. You know, like I didn't even follow astrology until the last couple of years. And that does have some value in it. Like, I think I can look back at transits at certain points in my life and see it where I was at, looking back. That's something that I do occasionally, like see what happened.
It's good for retrograde periods too, of just reviewing and looking back, and uh, that's something to schedule maybe is Mercury retrograde or Venus retrograde coming up this summer, of just doing some looking back life review. uh, or like the solar return. I like that concept too, looking back and looking forward. You can't do it all the time. It would be a lot of work. But yeah, the looking back and on previous transits, and then being in the moment of the current transit and kind of tracking yourself and doing studies based on that. Uh, Seems like a great way of doing it. And there's also, in the midst and right before a transit, there's a lot of content coming out from really great astrologers, like the Astrology Podcast, like Nightlight Astrology, who does like daily transit videos that are really deep and get into the archetypal significance. That's like studying gold. Like, so much information out there. Just have to kind of spend time with it and correlate it with your own experience. So cool.
Yeah, and I like to, like, just from a spiritual note, like give into Mercury and Hermes and just like allow myself to be guided by that archetypal energy, because of course they represent communication, knowledge, and divination and thought, you know, like it's our, so I love to just let my mind wander and imagine that it's being guided by Hermes and see where it takes me. And I come up with some crazy ideas, usually in the bath. But I think it's for me, like, since I've kind of like moved into believing in gods more than just psychological astrology, it really, I mean, I can see the value in, because like before we had psychology, like people, like the worldview is that our thoughts were actually guided by a god, by Hermes, and Hermes has got the role of the psychopomp, can travel to the underworld and up through the heavens, and the Mercury's retrograde cycle going into the heart of the sun in elemental patterns. So like it's currently going through the Earth. Every retrograde cycle will be in the Earth signs, and I'm just reading a book called Hermetica Triptycha by Gary P. Caton about that. Sorry, I'm pronouncing it wrong, but yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that I do, for me, like I put a lot of trust in that archetype to guide me.
Yeah, that's a good note of kind of bringing in the, like, the spirit aspect. Like, I think that's important myself too. Um, like, however someone's like religious views are, I think most traditions have some sort of acknowledgement of like divine powers at play. Uh, Even in monotheistic traditions, like astrology thrived in both the Islamic and Christian worlds for 2,000 years. Yeah, was rocky moments for sure, but there's definitely ways of approaching like the energies or the archetypes in a way of that treats them as beings. Uh, I kind of see them as beings and energies and like archetypes. And then maybe there's also distinctions too, but I don't see the need to simplify everything down to like one true thing. Um, which, just to slide another word about the house system debate, like that is just uninteresting to me, other than learning from the technical details. However, I see no problem in multiple house systems and exploring how those can be used. So similarly, like, yeah, what the planets are, they're not just big rocks that are influencing events. Maybe they are. They're definitely correlating. However, I kind of like the Greek view of that the planets, as we see and experience them, like are not the gods necessarily. They're sort of like a body or a manifestation of a god, which I think is a nice distinction. Because then it's not like Mars, for example, is just what we define Mars as, and then also like the planet that's orbiting the sun. It's Mars is many different things in our experience, like those great Renaissance texts, like by William Lilly or Gadbury, that list out like correspondences to everything for each planet, because those planets are all of those things, all of those actions, states of being, animals, plants, professions, locations, um, and those are all just indicated in some way by like the astrological positions and connections and whatnot. So um, yeah, I really like that approach. And um, for me, yeah, Hermes slash Mercury as the astrological kind of significator is very important. I also like looking into like other planets have connection with that too. I was just kind of talking about that on Twitter a few days ago, of people talking about like Mercury and being very important in an astrologer's chart. But then again, there's also Jupiter uh, seems to be prominent, and Saturn. Uh, so I think all of those planets have like things to give, and of course, all of the planets are involved in our astrology, which is why I like the idea of like a daily planetary prayer or meditation practice, to where you're kind of connecting with the energies like in their specified time, at least by day. uh, and for me, that involves kind of like just reciting a little prayer, maybe lighting a candle, and just kind of trying to feel that energy, both in general, like for today's Friday, so like the Venus energy, and but then also it's attempting to kind of feel out what Venus as a person, as a being, is like, and then thinking about Venus's current like placement in the zodiac, and like connections she's having. Um, that really helps me kind of feel in the astrology a bit more, so like doing that daily with each of the planets in order. Um, so yeah, definitely I see a lot of importance of bringing kind of that sacred back into the astrology, to the extent that it isn't necessarily there automatically for everyone these days.
That's cool.
But yeah, cool. Um, let's see if there's so we kind of wrapped a few in as we were going, but like, do you have any other like tips or tricks or advice for someone studying? And it could be at any level, anywhere from like very beginner all the way up to pretty advanced. Just some things that you think that might help someone who's trying to see how to approach their own studies.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is what we touched on earlier, your vision or your viewpoint on fate. It's important to understand that we all have, like, every individual has their own acceptance of how malleable fate is. And one thing I found is that it's really helpful to be like, whenever you're reading anyone else's perspective on a transit or something like that, or when you're reading someone else's chart, they have their own accepted understanding of whether this is like a deterministic fate that can't be changed, or if they have some sort of influence, and it's not my place to change their mind. Like, I'm just you gotta accept that, and find the beauty in. There's beauty in the fact that we have so many disagreements as astrologers, and that's it's really difficult to see the beauty in the disagreements, but that's part of what makes it so special, I think. And I think that's my most important tip, is to look at the beauty in our individual perspectives and try not to let it get you down. Because I've seen sometimes when I see like astrologers who, or like quote unquote astrologers, who are giving these sun sign pop astrology delineations, and I'm like, I get like a little bit angry, like, because I'm an Aries rising and I'm about to explode. I got to remember that, it's everybody has their own path, and I find comfort in thinking of astrology as fractal in nature. So everything is possible, I think. Like, because there's the sidereal zodiac, which is in Indian Vedic Jyotish. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. Astrology. We have our tropical zodiac, which are completely different, but I mean, we coexist and we both use our systems in our own way, and that's okay. And yeah, like, we just gotta not fight about their differences. We should celebrate them and stop fighting on Twitter about houses for at least a week or two. Just give us a week off.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point of maybe to reword it for my own understanding too, is like, don't get worried about differing opinions. Like, read around a lot, like, experience a lot, and just know that there are different systems or different, like, varieties of astrological systems, and many or all of them might work. They might do different things or see things through a different lens. However, it's not necessarily so important to try to discern what is the truest, and go with that. It's more of getting comfortable within a system that you like once you've kind of sampled some, uh, and using that as like your solid kind of base that you're deepening in. And then as you experience like debates on the internet or people giving like sun sign interpretations that may or may not be super accurate or important in the long run, you can take that with a grain of salt, basically, and maybe set it aside in your mind and come back to it, because it might be useful later as you reinterpret and incorporate it into your system. So you don't need to like let things go entirely. It's just more of deciding what you're going to take into your own personal practice, because you're building your own practice from the moment you first start learning about astrology until the moment you stop or die, I guess. So yeah, that's been good for me too, is just allowing that flexibility and focus at the same time to like be my solid point. And that sounds similar to what you're saying of just be open and not get discouraged by any one person's like particular viewpoint or take, or even a book. Like if you're learning astrology, obviously, like you're learning from these people who presumably know and have studied and practice a lot more than you, but that doesn't mean that you have to take what they're saying and like redo everything that you thought. It's more of what are you wanting to try out and focus on, and what are you willing to set aside as something to maybe explore later, or that's just not something for you. Um, an example for me, I guess, was it's a great book. I believe it's called Predictive Astrology by Bernadette Brady, and so that's a more modern book on timing techniques. So she talks about secondary progressions and transits mostly. I think those are the main two uh, things. Oh, I believe another title was like The Eagle and the Lark, um, which she had some really interesting ideas on, like the eagle being like the technique of the like the forecasting or predicting, but then the lark is when you allow yourself to jump out of that technique and kind of go oracular, I guess, of uh, letting the technique or the keywords or whatnot form the basis from which you then begin to make like rich astrological statements that come from your you as a person, your connection with those techniques, if that makes sense. So like the people, the astrologers are the diviners. The techniques are just the really rich and detailed systems that allow us as the diviners to uh, give something that's meaningful. I guess this is why like generated reports never really did anything for me even years ago, because that that oracular part, the divination part, just wasn't there. It's just listing out some interpretations based on alignments, and so that's something that I found really powerful in her book, and I took that and ran with it, even though I don't study for the most part her tradition. But then she had some other ideas that where she viewed secondary progressions, the modern timing technique, and transits as the most, uh, I guess, developed. I might be wording things wrong, so please refer back to the book, anyone who's curious about this. But um, she saw those modern techniques as the best timing for most modern people, and so like those are going to speak to like psychological states and whatnot, but there are a subset of people who those techniques don't work for, so then you have to revert to older techniques like primary directions and things like that. And to me that didn't really make sense. I mean, it made sense, however, I think if you allow the old techniques to speak for themselves in the way that like they want to be they want to speak, uh, I think like traditional timing techniques are just as rich and like expressive as the modern ones. So that's something I disagreed with based on some of my other studies. However, I still got a lot from like perusing that book and learning her techniques. I was just more rooted in the tradition that you describe of astrology podcast, Chris Brennan, Demetra George, and so on. So, and that's just a little example of something that in the past would have really bothered me, of like, wait, that does not align with what these other people are saying, and how do I make this all work as one system that makes sense? But then I kind of let myself chill out a little bit and be like, okay, I'm gonna go with this system because I really like how it's being practiced, and, uh, and then as I explore outside of that, just know that I don't have to accept everything, and yeah, I can question things too, but it doesn't have to hold me back or delay me. So yeah, that resonated with me quite a bit too, what you're saying.
It just popped into my head while you were saying that about martial arts. Like, I'm not a martial artist, and I don't like. I took karate when I was a kid, um, but then there's like the modern day mixed martial arts, where it's like these people who come from these different traditions of martial arts and they mix them together. And maybe think of what, like what you were saying, like you take the different parts of these different traditions and you use what works. Because like when you're in, I guess when you're in one of those situations where you're like fighting to the death, there's going to be some tradition that's going to work better with this opponent right now, and if you're trying to do some other tradition, you're going to get clobbered and be like stuck to the floor. I don't know
Yeah,
why
and
that popped into my head, because
oh
I'm
yeah,
not
no,
really
that's
into fighting
definitely
or anything.
relevant. Yeah, I myself did like a few months of Aikido several years ago, and I loved it. But yeah, like I think there's a good way to do it, and like a maybe a more difficult way of doing it. uh, of just I wouldn't suggest someone make a hodgepodge of whatever sounds good, especially at the beginning, because then it may or may not work for you. But you know, coming from uh, taking what works and incorporating that into what you do, uh, I think it's just great to think of that in a conscious way, because that's what we're really doing anyways. Traditional astrology, Hellenistic astrology, for example, only really existed like 2,000 years ago. It doesn't exist as Hellenistic astrology today. We can reconstruct techniques, um, but ultimately, like those techniques begin to come alive again when they're tested and tweaked and altered, like zodiacal releasing and some of the uh, astrologers out there, sorry, exploring that technique, and and as they're doing it, it's growing and changing, and it's maybe not what Valens did exactly 2,000 years ago, but it's like a useful technique, firmly rooted in the foundations of the tradition, and then can be incorporated and like cross-referenced and layered with other techniques, um, kind of building the astrology of the future, essentially. So, yeah, I really like that. And I say that about religion too. When people ask, is yeah, you can even say that you adhere to a very strict fundamentalist tradition, but at the end of the day, one's religion is one's own individual religious path, and they might try to make that path fit um, like what someone else tells them, but ultimately within them and within their daily existence, it's their own like syncretism of what they're learning and who they're listening to and what they're doing. So I think the same goes with astrology. Like uh, we're all kind of learning and growing and uh, like smushing different things together that may have never been smushed together, like secondary progressions and like the traditional cycle of the year techniques and like medieval Islamic astrology that I was looking into. Like they didn't do secondary progressions as far as I know. However, layering those on to traditional timing techniques just provides a different look at things. But so yeah, really like that kind of rooted but creative and experimental approach to building one's own astrology. So yeah.
Yeah, there's so much that, I mean, yeah, we all have every planet in our chart, and we just have to talk to them, I guess. I like to think of it as like you commune with your planets and they teach you about them. And yeah, I like that. Well, we all individually have our own way of interpreting. And I think I remember probably Chris Brennan saying something about even traditional astrologers in their texts would throw shade at other traditional astrologers. Be like, this guy knows nothing. I'm the one who knows everything. So like
Yeah.
even those old traditions were very like based on their individual practice.
Yeah, and that's good insight for us too, even as like modern day students. So cool. Um, I think we kind of covered a lot, and it's great. Is there? I do have one final question, but did you want to comment on any of the learning aspects before we started to wrap up?
No, like I've said that if I was a teacher, my first lesson would be to question everything that you're taught, and I think I'd love to learn about other people, how other people learn, because you know, I don't want to get too comfortable in my own way of learning, and because I feel like I don't like to get too comfortable like that. So yeah, I guess I just say like always be open to new perspectives.
Cool, cool. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hearing different approaches to learning too. That's why I'm excited about doing some of these interviews. Great. So I did have one last question. That's a bit of a different question, but I kind of wanted to end on this note, and I'm not fully even conscious of why, but it seemed an interesting to kind of. Well, let me just ask the question. It's what's one like positive vision that you have for the future of our astrological tradition or astrology in general?
Cool. A positive vision for the future. So the
And
first
I
thing
can
that
give some
comes to
background
mind.
too, if that would
Yeah,
help.
yeah, totally.
It's just it's easy to get involved, like you said, in kind of the day to day of like, okay, uh, these are the transits and this is the chit chat. Um, but for like me in my own life, even like kind of taking a step back and be like, wait, okay, what would be a better way of like, being in my own life or doing something or um, just bring a bit of that like if no one is envisioning like something great that they would like to see happen, then the the chances of that happening are very low. So it takes people to start thinking about how they want things to be, and then we can start seeing what like we as a group or individuals like can do to start making that happen. So that's just kind of like the thought behind a little bit that question. So
Yeah, be the change you want to see in the world.
yeah,
I had this thought the other day about how funny it would be, like if astrology was ubiquitous throughout our day-to-day life, and like so if you like worked in tech support and somebody called in and was like, yeah, my printer isn't working, and then you look at the chart and you're like, well, Mercury's in retrograde, what do you want me to do about it? So I just love to see a world where we all look at the planets, um, we look at what's going on, and it's like not just this niche little astrology community. Like I'd love to see a world where we are looking at it at and it's integrated. And I want to see a world where we're more open to that kind of thing. You know, it's like it all gets relegated to woo woo. It's just not, it's just woo woo. It's not science. It's not real. I'd love to see a world where that gets a little more integrated, where we do like, oh, let's think about it. You don't have to believe in it. You can just think about it. We can look at it. We can just take the data in. Because the whole point of science is taking in data and doing a hypothesis and doing a scientific method, blah, blah, blah. But if everybody is saying, oh no, we're not even going to take the data in, we're not even going to consider the data because it's all wrong and it's all woo-woo pseudoscience crap. Like we gotta find a healthy middle ground between there. That's what I want.
cool. Yeah, so I'll bounce off that a little bit too as I'm imagining what you're saying. Uh, to me, that means uh, involving astrology and education earlier versus never for most people. Uh, and that probably also, I mean, I'm sure kids can pick up astrology just as easier or more easily than adults, or whatever age that we find appropriate to kind of introduce that. I know there is always some sort of popular astrology. Uh, so I guess another way of looking at what you're saying is having a more intentional popular astrology that's more useful for people versus sun signs and then a few other vague notions, I guess. Um, So I could see people like, yeah, consulting with astrologers for like the technical nitty gritty, but being aware of like transits and cycles and personal timing. In a way, I would think that it's interesting. I'm also kind of imagining like crafting a popular astrology that would hopefully steer people away from like uh, doomerism that can happen when looking at transit sometimes, but towards like creative co-engagement with the energies. So that's kind of an interesting thought of like introducing that approach in a more like popular way, because the popular astrology we have now is very sun sign, but in the past there were like almanacs, like from Lily's time up until uh, the 20th century of moon signs and planting by the moon and the moon phases. Um, and I'm not sure what else were in those. I should probably look into that. But uh, so that's one version of popular astrology, and um, yeah, it's just interesting way of looking at it, because I could see the pushback of like not everyone has like the mindset of being able to deal with tracking transits. But I don't think that's a hurdle necessarily. It's just more of disseminating astrological knowledge in a thoughtful way, um, knowing that not everyone is going to become an astrologer, nor should they. Like maybe one should know how to like change their oil and change this put on a spare tire, but they don't need to know how to like be an auto mechanic. Uh, so you sounds like you're talking about kind of at the level of changing a spare tire, changing out the oil as like a way of approaching the cycles that we're all in, uh, but a little more consciously. And I like that. Yeah, great thought.
I think would have cascading effect too, where we would get more in touch with our physical environment and realize that we are like one with our environment. We're not separate from it, which is kind of what drives a lot of the ecological imbalance is our as humans believing that we're like better than the rest of nature and we can control it and manipulate it and extract its resources without any regard for the balance that we should. I think it would all be connected, and I think it might help because like yeah, like the world we live in right now is not very balanced. At least where I live, like it's really messed up in Alberta.
Yeah, I think that yeah, we can all agree on that one at this point. Of we have that the train accident in Ohio and all sorts of stuff going on, and so yeah, that's uh, but I do also think it's a time of a lot of potential, uh, and I'm not one of those people that's like, oh yeah, we're like ready for the next great upgrade in the level of consciousness or something. I'm like, well, I think overall society and history goes in cycles. Uh, Obviously, being into astrology, um, and while it would be nice to see like all of society kind of wake up, it's not what I'm expecting, but it does take people uh, to carry on traditions and ideas and put new ideas into the world. Because if even some portion of people have um, a richer connection to the astrology than just sun sign astrology, um, I think that would make those people's lives much better and just kind of uplift uh, like society overall. That's kind of just the thought I'm having. So, uh, yeah, I mean, really cool thoughts. And what I mean by like a potential moment is where, at this moment where uh, we have a lot of really big like changes into the age of air, since the day that you got into astrology, which is very, uh, I think, a really cool moment to begin. So like the next 200 years are going to be, I think, more, I mean, just a very simple, like thinking with that age of air concept, like conceptually tumultuous would be a very airy way of describing that. Um, so in that whirlwind that we'll be in, um, it's a moment where things aren't locked down, like the ways of thinking and ways of looking at the world. Uh, as long as there's people like nurturing really good or really like fulfilling or like spiritually deep ways of being in the world, uh, those might become the seeds for the next. I believe the next one is an age of water. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one. Uh, well, but regardless, like uh, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but just kind of thinking of these things that we want to see happen, and then uh, really, like you said, be the change you want to see. So, what are things that we can do in our practice and our interactions in day-to-day life where we can plant those seeds of what we want to see, and then those can maybe grow and spread and hopefully create a new, different society in the future. If that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
I think um, the most active way that we could do that for people, for everyone. And I actually said this to my boss once. He was like, "Yeah, so we had this event at this person's store or restaurant because we wanted to support them." And I was like, "Well, where you put your money is the world you create, and that's something that we can tangibly tell people. Like, where you're putting your money is the world you're creating. If you're buying Nestle products, you're creating a world where Nestle, you're giving your energy to Nestle, and you're supporting Nestle's vision of the world. And so, like, yeah, like I think, and money's very airy. I think it's definitely something we can, if we can just get out to the people that like, where you put your dollars is the world you make. And it's hard when you're in poverty and you can't really decide, you don't really have much money, but it's just true. It's where money goes is where the world that gets made. In the world in the capitalist world we live in.
Sure, and uh, I guess even like expanding on that, like that's I absolutely agree with that, and thinking also, um, even expanding that to like the thoughts and interactions and communications that we're having, like change reality, and those are all very airy things as well, and so like thinking about the reality that you're creating, or the interactions and like relations and communications that you're having, what are all of those building towards? uh, I mean, most likely there's like a past pushing them forward, but they're all pointing towards something that's like the uh, I don't know. That's something to think about a little bit, at
Yeah.
least. But um, yeah,
Yeah, we live in a world, we live in, well, at least where in my Western capitalistic society I live in, we're kind of like take it, they say, but you don't have like you don't really, you kind of like, it is what it is. It's kind of like the going saying, it's like, well, it is what it is, but it's not what it is. It isn't what it is. It's what you make it. And
yeah, and that's like that's different than saying like you're responsible for everything that happens to you. I don't think that's necessarily true. However, uh, back to the kind of free will idea, like I think people have a lot of agency that they're not even aware of. Like I think people are constantly doing magic of some kind of projecting a reality and then stepping into it. Uh, Even as simple as like the thoughts that they're having, and um, the things that they're envisioning, which is again why I kind of wanted to add a little envisioning at the end to, like, yeah, we're thinking about the astrology and learning and like loving it, it's also like, what are we stepping into? Like, each individual contributes to kind of like the field of astrology, or the like the spiritual tradition, and so we all have the opportunity of moving that, and everything in general in a different direction. We just kind of take on that, I guess, responsibility that we've always had, but we just never really, maybe we didn't know about it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, really,
Cool.
I have great hope for the future. I think it's going to be, well, I mean, whatever happens will happen.
Yeah, I guess that's a good note to be like, I think there's tough stuff ahead for sure, depending, no matter what your views, the astrology is intense and changing, especially over the next decade or two. But that's just that's another, benefit of astrology, is just knowing that uh, you know this cycle is going to change. If it's going to be bad, then most likely there's going to be good, and I think there's some sort of meaning in it, and a reason why we're collectively going through what we're going through is, uh, this is the astrology that we might have elected. I'm not sure of my views of like exactly how that would work pre-birth, but I don't think it's some sort of random whirlwind. Personally, I think we're here for a reason.
Yeah, I just thought the other day of how this period that we're living through, where the way that the planets are in this predictable cycle is actually just a very brief moment in the history of the universe. Like from the Big Bang to when the sun collapses and all of the Earth and the planets get sucked into the collapsing sun. Like this period that we're living through is like, it's like sweet. It reminds me of like when you drop like a lid of a can and it starts like spinning around, and there's a period there where it looks like it's like going to go forever, and it's like spinning around and around. And that's where we are right now, like in the history of in the of from the beginning of the universe to the beginning of the solar system to the end of the sun. We're in that like tenuous balance of where the lid is spinning around, and it's like, whoa, that lid is never going to stop. But it's going to stop, and it's all going to collapse on each other. Not in our lifetimes, and maybe not in the history of humanity, but it's actually going to happen. And it's just like, whoa, like we're in that point right now where we're alive when we can record video talking across distances. It's just like, whoa, what, wow, whoa.
Yeah. It's some big thoughts of, yeah, to me that's comforting. It's I like to imagine like other intelligent species existing hundreds of millions of years ago that we have no record of, uh, and then hundreds of millions of years in the future, other species, and then maybe a billion years after that, the very last intelligent species like practicing their own astrology, and uh, then the sun finishes up, and who knows what is going on elsewhere at that time. um,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it's big stuff.
It may be a little too big. That's what's great about astrology. It's a defined system, and if you keep within the system, it works.
No, well, finding I'm not thinking of much else to expand on that wouldn't be its own like huge conversation. Any other notes or comments that you'd like to make?
I just want to say, like, thanks a lot for having me on as your first guest. Like, it means a lot. I really loved meeting you through Astro Twitter, and I think that you have a great things ahead of you. I'm really loving the content you're putting out in terms of, your YouTube videos on interplanetary relationships and contact, and I love your articles, and um, all the best on your 200 charts to read. I'm so happy I could be one of them, and I think you're a great astrologer, and I really wish the best for your podcast and all of your work.
Oh, thank you, and Yeah, it was great meeting you as well. Hopefully we'll have some more of these chats. I see that there's a lot more that we could talk about besides just the learning side of things, which I hope to get into as well. Uh, and yeah, it was great getting a reading from you as well. I recommend astrologers and student astrologers to swap readings because you can learn a lot from each other and just get different perspectives, um, or just get readings from other astrologers because that was great. And then we could both give feedback to each other. So yeah, did you want to tell people where they can like find you if they want to interact with you on like social media?
Sure, yeah, I guess for now I'm mostly found on Twitter at Astral Hermit. I go by Robobo. My name's Rob, but I just like the sound of it. And if you want to reading from me, just ask, and maybe you shall receive.
Great, great. Well, thanks again for being a part of this experiment with me, and we'll see where it goes from here. It was great having you as my first guest, and great conversation.
Totally, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.